You know his name, Sigmund Freud. But do you know what he left behind? Not just theories, not just the Oedipus complex or the ID and ego. He left behind a question, one that echoed through lecture halls, therapy rooms, and quiet midnight minds. What does a woman want? He never gave a definitive answer. Maybe he couldn't. Maybe he wasn't supposed to. Maybe the question wasn't designed to be solved like a riddle, but lived like a mystery. So why don't we talk about it? Why does this question make us uncomfortable, defensive, dismissive? Why have generations of men turned away from the map Freud drew? Because they were too afraid to walk it. The truth is harsh. We were never taught how to listen. Not to women, not to silence, not to ourselves. And because of that, we've missed something profound. Not just about women, but about humanity, about connection, intimacy, truth. Freud was many things. Arrogant, brilliant, flawed. But he wasn't afraid to go where others refused. He stood at the threshold of a vast, dark forest called the feminine and said, "Look, there is something here we don't understand." And we laughed at him. We reduced it to jokes. We mocked his obsession with sex, with dreams, with mothers. We labeled his ideas outdated, misogynistic, even perverse. But we didn't read carefully enough. Because beneath the symbols and smoke, Freud was pointing to something dangerous. That we as a culture, as men, as people, are terrified of what we cannot control. And the feminine, in its depth, in its fluidity, in its refusal to be categorized, threatens that control. So we put up walls. We wrote books on how to get women. We made movies where they were prizes or problems. We turned complex human beings into stereotypes. Why? Because it was easier than looking in the mirror. Easier than admitting that understanding women meant confronting our own emotional illiteracy. Easier than letting go of the illusion that logic can solve everything. But if you're reading this, something in you is tired of the surface. You've seen the patterns, the relationships that fall apart because no one truly listens. The women who go silent, not because they agree, but because they're done explaining. The arguments that aren't about what she said, but about what you never learned to hear. This is not an attack. This is an invitation to ask a question that has no clean answer. To walk into the unknown, not to dominate it, but to witness it. To rediscover Freud, not as a god, not as a fool, but as a man who dared to say, "We don't know." And maybe in that admission lies our first real step toward understanding. So take a breath, forget what you think you know, and come closer. There is a map on the table, and it's time we stop pretending it isn't there. What does she want? It sounds like a simple question, and yet it has haunted men for generations. Not because women are unknowable, but because most men have never been taught how to know themselves first. Freud didn't pose the question to dismiss or diminish women. He posed it to confront a terrifying truth. Men, especially those clinging to illusions of control, cannot grasp the feminine if they remain strangers to their own emotional depth. So let's ask what no man dares to ask. Why are we afraid to understand women? The answer isn't flattering. It's not wrapped in romance or nobility. It's wrapped in fear. Fear of surrender. Fear of not being enough. Fear of being seen. Most men are conditioned to seek answers, to fix problems, to conquer. But to understand the feminine is not to conquer it. It is to feel. And that feeling is the forbidden art. We are raised on a diet of control. Don't cry. Don't need. Don't ask. So what do we do instead? We chase. We manipulate. We withdraw. We perform. We mistake attention for affection. We mistake dominance for strength. We become fluent in tactics, but illiterate in intimacy. Let me ask you something. Have you ever sat across from a woman you love and felt like a stranger? Not because she changed, but because you never really knew her beyond the surface. That is the real fear, the one no one dares admit, that perhaps we've spent our lives performing masculinity, not living it. And the cost of that performance? Real connection, real intimacy, real truth. Carl Jung once said, "Your vision will become clear only when you can look into your own heart." Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakes. Understanding a woman requires the courage to look inside, because until a man can sit with his own chaos, he cannot hold space for another's. Until a man can accept his own complexity, he will simplify hers. And until a man can stop performing and start being, he will see women not as whole beings, but as roles to be filled, lover, mother, muse. This is where most men get stuck. They don't know how to ask the question. Or worse, they ask it expecting an answer that fits their fantasy, not reality. But let me be clear. The feminine is not here to be understood by logic alone. She is not a puzzle to be solved. She is a force to be met, a mirror, a storm, and yes, at times a mystery. So why do we pretend otherwise? Because mystery makes us feel powerless, and men have been taught to fear powerlessness more than anything else. We are told to control, to dominate, to win. But what if power wasn't in the domination, but in the presence? What if real strength was the ability to witness someone, without judgment, without agenda, and still remain whole? Let's take a breath and get honest. Think of a woman you've hurt, not out of cruelty, but confusion. Think of the things you didn't say, the truths you didn't share, the emotions you buried. Now ask yourself, was it really her that confused you? Or was it you, unwilling to sit in the vulnerability of not knowing? This is where Freud left us, not with an answer, but with a doorway. He knew something modern culture forgot, that the journey into the feminine is not just about women. It's about wholeness. It's about reclaiming the lost parts of ourselves that we sacrificed at the altar of appearing strong. So no, you won't find a step-by-step guide here, but you will find something deeper. Permission to be confused, to be curious, to ask without needing to own, to listen without needing to fix. Because here's the truth. The man who dares to ask the question, who dares to be humble, who dares to love without needing to solve, is the man who finally begins to understand, not just women, but himself. So ask it, not with your intellect, but with your presence. Ask it and then wait, not for the answer, but for the silence that follows. That silence, that's where the real conversation begins. You've been told who she is your entire life. She's the girl next door, the perfect wife, the nurturing mother, the seductive muse, the emotional puzzle you're supposed to solve, the reward waiting at the end of your ambition. But who told you these things? Culture? Movies? Your father? Your friends? Or maybe you told yourself, because the truth was far too uncomfortable. She is not who you think she is. Not because she is hiding, but because your lens is distorted. You see what you expect, not what is. And most men expect simplicity, because complexity demands presence, demands attention, demands growth. We are conditioned to reduce women to roles, labels, symbols. It starts early. Boys don't cry. Girls are emotional. She is the emotional one. You are the rational one. She feels. You fix. She reacts. You retreat. It's a dance as old as patriarchy itself. But let me ask you this. What if she isn't reacting? What if she's reflecting? Reflecting your own emotional illiteracy back at you? Your avoidance, your fears, your suppressed chaos. In Jungian terms, the feminine is not just a gendered concept. It is a principle, a psychic force, one that lives inside both men and women. To reduce her to biology is to miss the point. To see her only through your needs is to never see her at all. You want her to be soft, supportive, sensual, safe. But what if she is rage? What if she is truth? What if she is freedom incarnate? Are you ready to meet that? Because if you're not, you'll keep molding her into something manageable, tame, predictable, convenient. You'll say she's too much, too emotional, too complicated. But what you really mean is, she challenges your illusion of control. The philosopher Simone de Beauvoir once wrote, "One is not born, but rather becomes a woman." To understand her, you must understand that she too is in process. Not a destination, not a stereotype, not an object of desire wrapped in skin and silence. She is becoming, as are you. And yet, we expect her to show up fully formed, to know what we want, to play the part, to soothe our wounds without naming hers. This is not understanding. This is projection. You want to know who she really is? Then start by dismantling your assumptions. She is not your savior. She is not your scapegoat. She is not your mother, your ex, your fantasy, or your redemption. She is herself, and she owes you nothing. The question is, can you meet a woman as she is, not as you want her to be? This is the frontier most men never cross, the edge where control dies and intimacy begins. To cross it requires humility. Not the fake humility of nice words and open doors, but the raw humility of listening deeply, of sitting in discomfort, of owning your shadow. Because what you often label as her drama is your inability to sit with emotional truth. What you call her moodiness is your lack of emotional range. She is not erratic. She is alive. And that aliveness terrifies men who only know how to love what they can predict. So they criticize it, shame it, distance themselves from it. But every time you walk away from her truth, you walk away from your own. The great psychoanalyst Erich Neumann, a student of Jung, wrote extensively on the feminine as the source of creativity and transformation. He argued that the hero's journey is not a conquest of the feminine, but a union with it. This means the journey is not to control her, but to integrate her. To stop seeing her as the enemy of logic and start seeing her as the key to emotional wholeness. She is not who you think she is because you are not yet who you need to be to truly see her. You want her to be soft, but you fear her strength. You ask her to open up, but you recoil at her truth. You desire her body, but fear her soul. And so, you remain at the surface. You think you're engaging, but you're only orbiting. You think you're close, but you're miles away. If you want to bridge that distance, you must first stop performing. Stop seeking validation. Stop turning connection into transaction. She can feel it. Every woman you've ever met has felt it. The moment when she becomes a mirror instead of a mystery. She becomes a reflection of your needs, not a person in her own right. And yet, you still wonder why she pulls away. She is not pulling away. She is protecting her soul. Because she's tired of being misunderstood. Tired of being reduced. Tired of being a placeholder in your emotional script. The challenge, then, is not to figure her out. It is to meet her with presence. To let her unfold without grasping. To stop asking, what does she want? And start asking, what am I unwilling to feel? That question will burn, but it will also free you. Because the man who meets a woman in her full expression, who does not flinch or flee, discovers something sacred. Not just in her, but in himself. He finds the courage to be still, to listen, to feel. And in that space, something ancient awakens. Something unspoken, a truth deeper than knowledge. She is not who you think she is. And maybe that's the best news of all. Her silence. You think it's peace, a sign of surrender, maybe even forgiveness. It isn't. Have you ever wondered what hides behind a woman's silence? Have you ever paused long enough to listen to what is not being said? Because in the stillness of her lips lies a storm. We live in a world that teaches men to mistake silence for weakness and retreat for defeat. But what if that silence is not about you? What if her quiet is a battlefield you've never dared enter? Most people do not really want freedom, because freedom involves responsibility, and most people are frightened of responsibility. Sigmund Freud, silence is not absence. It is presence in its most formidable form. A woman's silence, especially after pain, betrayal, or disappointment, is not compliance. It's calculation. It's observation. It's self-preservation. You hurt her. Maybe you didn't mean to. Maybe you did. But now you sit in the aftermath, watching her quiet, mistaking it for victory, thinking she gave up. No, she chose to stop explaining herself. She stopped talking because you stopped listening. That silence? That's not the end of the conversation. It's the sound of a woman reclaiming her narrative. Away from you. Let's stop pretending we don't understand what's going on here. How many times did she speak before the silence? How many times did she ask, beg, cry, or simply express? You didn't hear her then. So now you hear nothing at all. And that is not a win. It is a loss, a great one. Her silence is a reckoning, a final boundary, the line in the sand you crossed too many times. She may still be there physically. Maybe she hasn't left yet. But emotionally, spiritually, she's gone. And the silence is her luggage. Pain has a language, but not always a voice. You don't see the scars because they're internal. You don't hear the anger because it's simmered down into reflection. You don't feel her confusion because she stopped sharing it. She found solitude safer than your answers. That silence you think is passive? It's a turning point. It's the moment she began building a world without you at the center. And no, she doesn't hate you. She just realized she cannot keep emptying herself to fill your emptiness. Never assume that silence means acceptance or that patience means indifference. R.H. Sin. This silence is her strategy, her recovery, her wisdom finally overriding her emotions. You thought you won because she stopped arguing? You lost her voice. You lost her presence. You lost the part of her that still believed you'd change. Let's not sugarcoat this. Women carry more than they should. They bend until they break. And sometimes they never make a sound when they shatter. Because society told them being too emotional is wrong. Because men were praised for being stoic while women were punished for being sensitive. Because somewhere along the way, her expression became inconvenient. So she went quiet, and you called that maturity, peace, grace. But it was grief, the death of expectation, the burial of hope. the silence of a heart that no longer believes it's safe to be loud. Freud once spoke of repression, the mind's way of burying pain it cannot face. But silence is not repression. It is expression. In code, you need to learn how to read it. Ask yourself, did she really become less talkative? Or did you become more dismissive? Is she actually calm? Or is she exhausted from explaining the same pain in 1,000 different ways? Her silence is not your validation. It's not her saying, you were right. It's her deciding she's done trying to prove she was. And this should terrify you, because a woman in silence is a woman in transformation. She is not who she was when she loved you loudly. She is becoming who she needs to be to live without needing you. This isn't just about relationships. It's about recognition. Recognizing the moments when your pride cost you connection, when your ignorance cost you intimacy. She asked for your attention. You gave her your ego. Now she gives you silence. There's a balance to everything. For every raised voice, there comes a quiet decision. For every ignored tear, a lesson is written. One day she'll speak again, but not to you. She will speak to herself, to the people who see her, hear her, honor her. Her silence now is the sound of her preparing for that world. And when you finally realize what her silence meant, it will be too late. The door will be shut, and all you'll hear is the echo of what you refused to listen to when it still had sound. Her silence is not your victory. It's your sentence. You've been taught to look for solutions, to solve problems, to fix what's broken. That mindset has served you well in the world of machines. It's helped you in business, in science, even in crisis. But when you apply it to people, especially to the feminine, you break more than you build. And you don't even realize it. Have you ever sat in front of a woman and felt a swirl of emotions you couldn't decode? Have you ever tried to make her feel better, only to watch her retreat deeper into silence? Have you ever felt useless in the face of her pain? Good. That means you're finally close to something real. Because her inner world was never a Rubik's Cube you could twist your way into solving. Carl Jung once said, "The psyche is not a machine, it is a living being." Yet how often do we treat the emotional and spiritual lives of women like math problems? You ask, "What's wrong?" She says, "Nothing." And instead of listening to the music behind the words, you get frustrated that the lyrics don't make sense. You were trained to believe that logic is king. That direct answers matter more than the feeling behind them. That clarity is better than chaos. But in the world of the feminine, chaos isn't the enemy. It's the source. Let that sink in. The chaos you run from is the same chaos that creates life. When Freud explored the unconscious, he was haunted by one question more than any other. What does a woman want? He never answered it, because that question doesn't have a definitive answer. It was never meant to. The feminine psyche is fluid, layered, and ancient. It's not a linear road, it's an ocean. And what do men do when they fear the ocean? They build walls. They write off what they cannot control. They reduce the unknown to labels. She's crazy. She's hormonal. She's overreacting. No, she's alive. And her mind doesn't need your judgment. It needs your presence. There's a reason ancient traditions referred to the feminine as a mystery, a force, a sacred womb. She was never meant to be figured out. She was meant to be felt. You see, when you stop trying to fix her, something remarkable happens. She opens. Not because you found the right algorithm. Not because you cracked some emotional code. But because you stopped making her feel like a malfunctioning device. The real reason most men never connect deeply with women isn't because they're bad. It's because they're impatient. They want quick access, immediate meaning, fast emotional downloads. But the female mind isn't a search engine. It's poetry. You don't read poetry to solve it. You read it to feel it. So when she tells you about her day, and it sounds like a tangled web of memories, emotions, and seemingly unrelated thoughts, don't pull out your logical toolkit. Just listen. When she breaks down over something small, don't try to explain why it's not a big deal. Just sit with her. Be with her. The moment you try to dissect her soul, you've already lost it. We've become a society addicted to clarity, speed, and productivity. But intimacy doesn't live in those places. Intimacy lives in the in-between, in the pauses, in the trembling silence before the tears fall. She doesn't want you to have all the answers. She wants to know you won't run when there are none. Read that again. There's a quiet tragedy in how men are raised. We're taught to protect, to provide, to fix, but not to sit with discomfort, not to hold space for emotion without needing to resolve it. When she spirals into her depths, and you resist the urge to interrupt, that's when trust is born. And trust is the gateway to everything you think you want. Not the surface level affection, not the performative connection, but the real thing. You think she's distant because you haven't found the right words. She's distant because you treat her emotions like puzzles. She's not asking you to fix her. She's asking you to meet her where she is, even when where she is makes no sense to you. Especially then. This isn't a call to abandon reason. It's a call to balance it with reverence. You can be intelligent and intuitive, analytical and empathetic, but you can't love someone deeply if you're constantly trying to decode them. Because love isn't a code, it's a language, and the feminine speaks it fluently. What does it take to unlearn the need to solve women? It takes humility. It takes letting go of the belief that you must always understand to be valuable. It takes a willingness to walk into the forest without a map. She doesn't need a GPS. She needs your hand. She needs you to stop seeing her as a problem, because the moment you do, you become one yourself. Don't just love her mind. Honor it. Don't just study her patterns. Surrender to the rhythm. And maybe, just maybe, she'll invite you into the part of her soul that no one else gets to see. Not because you solved her, but because you saw her. Why is it that so many relationships break not because of betrayal, not because of conflict, but because of silence? Have you ever stopped to wonder why the moments you remember most aren't always the ones filled with words, but with understanding? Because listening isn't a skill. It's an act of love, and a forgotten art. In today's world, we hear more than ever, but listen less than we ever have. We're distracted. We're preoccupied. We're busy waiting to respond rather than trying to understand. And this, more than anything, kills connection. Her silence isn't always anger. Sometimes it's a test, a plea, a cry for a type of attention that goes beyond conversation. You see, women, just like men, want to be seen. Not just looked at, not just tolerated, but seen. And seeing begins with listening. Nietzsche once wrote, "Invisible threads are the strongest ties." What are those threads made of? Moments where you didn't rush to speak. Moments where you didn't correct her feelings. Moments where you let her truth stand, even when it made you uncomfortable. Real love isn't loud. It's not boastful. It's rarely dramatic. Real love listens. Most men are terrified of silence in a relationship. But silence isn't the enemy. Indifference is. Are you truly listening? Or just pretending to care long enough to move the conversation back to yourself? Freud suggested that unspoken emotions never die. They are buried alive and come forth later in uglier ways. How many of her resentments today are the ghosts of conversations you avoided months ago? Listening requires courage. The courage to hear something unpleasant. The strength to hold space for emotions you can't fix. Because she doesn't always want a solution. She wants a witness. She doesn't always want your logic. She wants your presence. Listening isn't passive. It's the most active kind of attention. It requires energy, humility, and restraint. It's the art of sitting with someone's truth without trying to rearrange it. How many arguments could be prevented if you just said, "I hear you. I understand why you feel that way. That must be hard." 3 simple phrases that build bridges instead of walls. But most never say them. Why? Because ego gets in the way. Because we think listening is losing. Because we think being quiet makes us weak. When in reality, silence can be power. Have you ever looked into someone's eyes while they spoke their truth, and you just listened, without interrupting, without solving, without judging? That's not weakness. That's strength. Love begins not when we speak, but when we learn to shut up and lean in. We assume we know her, that her words repeat, her problems loop, her emotions recycle. But no one steps into the same river twice. Neither does she. She evolves. Her pain changes. Her joys deepen. Her needs shift. If you aren't listening, you're loving a memory, not a person. Real connection means showing up again and again as if you know nothing and want to learn everything. When's the last time you asked her, "What are you afraid of lately? What's been inspiring you lately? What do you wish I'd noticed but don't?" If you can't remember, you've stopped listening. And when listening dies, intimacy fades. You don't lose her when she leaves. You lose her when she stops speaking. But even worse, you lose her when she realizes you never truly listened in the first place. Don't wait for a breakup to understand what you had. Don't wait for her silence to realize you've been deaf. Start now. Listen with your heart. Respond with your eyes. Show her that her inner world matters to you. Because when a woman feels heard, she blooms. And when she blooms, love becomes effortless. This isn't about simping. This isn't about pleasing. It's about being present. Schopenhauer believed most people mistake noise for meaning. But meaning is quiet. Meaning lives in the pauses, the nods, the held breath. Listening is the highest form of empathy, and empathy is the soul of love. So the next time she speaks, don't prepare your answer. Prepare your attention. That's how trust is built. That's how intimacy grows. That's how love begins again. By listening.